Bring it back to life. There we go. So who am I? So I'm Dave Boyne. I've been with AWS for just under 2 months now. I'm a senior developer advocate on the DA serverless team. So they're doing some great stuff. I've learned a lot from that team and happy to be part of that team. I'm a father of 2, so I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, 2 boys, and they keep me super young. I feel like they keep me super young, but honest to God, ever since having them, I've had these grey hairs coming, so I try and keep my hair short and spiky at the top. That's what you see in that photo. Ex-guitar player, again, since having kids, I had to give something up, and it was my guitar playing, but bass guitar, enjoy playing the guitar, and also singing. So one day, maybe, might be able to do that again. And previously, I've been doing some work in startups, some serverless work there. I've spent some of my time in full-time open source, actually, which was incredible. I do a lot of open source. I'm super passionate about that. And event-driven architecture work. When I was working in the startups, kind of found my love for serverless and found my love for event architectures, right? And that kind of leads me into this talk. And what I want to kind of share with you in the 20 minutes that I have is 3 main things, really. 3 things that I've learned over the past that can impact your event architectures. So the first one is how the design of your event itself can impact your architecture. And I'll be talking about a story and an example there. And also we'll be exploring some event patterns. So what event patterns do we have when we're talking about event architectures? And also, finally, what is event-first thinking? Why is that important? Why should you care? So, when we talk about event architectures, this thing's a bit lagging. Cool, so we have these kind of benefits, right? And I remember when I was using serverless and I was reading a lot online about event architectures and all the benefits, loosely coupled systems, right? And we can accelerate our architecture with this growth and its extensibility. We can also have like decoupled teams. We can fire events, for example, somewhere, and we have consumers consuming these kind of events. So I was leading a team at the time and decided to implement all this stuff. And then what happened was true. You know, we were flying, honestly. We had all these features and requirements coming in. We would fire events to our event bus using EventBridge, have consumers of that, and the next day, the next week, more requirements would come in, and we would continuously get this value and deliver this thing at speed. Now, a problem happened, a problem emerged. In about 6 months down the line to about a year, this stuff, these features, started to, kind of break away, right? I started to see more coupling within our architectures, our event architectures. And I was thinking, aren't I meant to be getting the benefits here? Aren't I meant to be seeing this stuff? And the extensibility and the loosely coupled, all these benefits started to go away. And when I review that and looking back in this time and with the team at the time, I realized it was actually the event design itself impacted the architecture. So the question is, what do I mean by event design? How do we design events? And you'll often see this kind of pattern emerge when we get an event or we get a requirement that comes in. So with event architectures, you know, it could be an order-created event. So when we have an order service, we raise an event in our system. But you kind of have this system, this 3-stage system. We get the requirement in. The requirement comes into the team. We are the order service team. We're a big team here. And then next, we have the design phase. So we design the event, and then we implement the event. So talking about this, if we look at an example of this. So here we have a simple kind of microservices architecture. So we have the order service, we're going to fire events into the event bus, and we're going to have downstream consumers. Right, so where can this go wrong? Well, first thing, we get the order created event. So I am part of the order service, and we decide as a team, we huddle around, and we create this event on the fly. So the requirement is when an order comes in, we need to create this type of event. So we decide together as a team, we come around, and we say, okay, we're going to use EventBridge. And we have to pass all the information in the event, that's fine. But in the detail, that's our payload. we decide to pass in two things. We decide to pass in the order ID and the user ID. So the order service team sits there and thinks, we've done our job, fire the event off. And then down in the consumers think, thank you very much, thanks for your event. And once you'll notice, this event type, this event pattern is often known as referred to as the notification event. So we're notifying the system that something happened, and the contract in the event itself is super simple. So the invoice service comes along and says, thank you very much. And the order service says, that's cool. And then everyone celebrates, the value is delivered, and everyone lives happily ever after. This has actually happened to me. What happens is over time, what the order service team might not know is the invoice service team starts to go back to the orders, because all they have is the order ID, right? So they need to get the information from somewhere. Now this pattern might be okay, but what happens when more downstream consumers start connecting to the event? So we have the forecasting service. This starts requesting to get more information from the order service. And that kind of keeps going and going. So this company, this team I was working on at the time, is we had this event architecture patterns, and we were kind of YOLOing our events, like, yeah, let's just fire this out, and getting all this value, immediate value. But what you'll notice over time, our monitoring and our API, we had coupling. We just had coupling again. We're back to a coupled system with the order ID being used to get information. So if we talk about event patterns, this is what, when you start looking online and start consuming content, this is the kind of thing you'll see. So this is a notification event. So simple contract, we fire off this into the system that something has happened. Downstream consumer comes and grabs that, says, thank you very much, I'm going to process this event. So the producer does not know about the consumer. But we have a risk in this kind of pattern, we have the risk of coupling. So we still think we've got decoupled systems because we're firing events, but we have a coupling between that producer and consumer because the consumer needs to go get that information. It's kind of a pull model, right, rather than a push model. So it pulls information, the consumer pulls information from external sources to what it needs. And if you're using EventBridge, you also have like limited filtering capabilities. So your event doesn't have much state in it, so how can you start filtering and using EventBridge rules here? So if we take a step back for a minute, we start thinking about what other event patterns and what other designs we could use. So we get the order created event that comes in again from the business, from the requirements. And this time, the order service team comes together and they decide, you know what, instead of passing the IDs in this time, I'm going to pass some state in. Well, why would you do that? I don't know, maybe I'm YOLOing here. So what they decide to do is pass the order object in and the user object in. So we're passing state here. And again, if you go online and you start looking at this kind of pattern, this is the event carried state transfer pattern. So you have the state is being pushed downstream to consumers, right? More information inside the event. So next time, the invoice service says, thank you very much for your event. And this time, maybe that information is within the event payload, so it doesn't need to go back to the order service this time. And the forecasting service says, actually, I want to be notified of this event, but only when a certain criteria on the payload is met. So it creates a rule on EventBridge, for example, and only events maybe with the amount of over 50 might go to the forecasting service. Now you might be thinking, what problems do we have with this kind of event? And in the past, these are similar problems to what I found when using this pattern, which is domain assumptions, right? So the order team have built this thing, they've published this event, and we think we got this value, which we might have. But there might be some assumptions within this payload, within this contract. So I'll give you an example, the amount. So if you ask the order service team what the amount is, they go, well, it's in euros, what else could it be? And the invoice service team says, hang on, it could be in cents, it could be in sterling. You know, why aren't you explicit here? Address. Why do you only pass me the postcode or the zip code? What about the rest of the address? Did the user not enter this address? Oh, I don't know. You could just look up the address, can't you? It's your job, consumer. You do what you need to do. And then user information. Order service thinks, again, YOLO, I'm just going to put the user information in there. And operations teams are thinking, hang on, isn't this PII data? Is this being logged anywhere? Consumers are thinking, oh, thank you very much for this user email address. Maybe I shouldn't have access to that. So you start thinking about these patterns. You start thinking about event-carried state transfer patterns, about this push model. And remember, with notifications, we're pulling. With this kind of pattern, we're pushing state, we're pushing data to consumers. Now we have contracts. This is the difference, that they tend to be bigger in contract and notifications less in contract. And what that means is we are coupling. We are no longer coupled maybe by request-response patterns within our architecture, but we are now coupled, or could be coupled, with the contracts of the event payload themselves. So when we change event contracts, we might break our downstream consumers. And when you start comparing the two side by side, you start thinking, which one should I use? So again, on the left, notifications, minimal in their events. On the right, event carries state transfer, which are bigger in their events. We've got the pull, we've got the push, okay? And also, you know, with Event Bridge, harder to filter versus easy to filter. Now you might be sat there thinking, which one should we use then with event design patterns? And there are also other event design patterns. You've got domain events, which are events that fly within your bounded context, within your domains itself. And I think when I was kind of thinking back on this and thinking at the time, I think we need to change the fundamental way we actually design events, the fundamental way in which we pull our events together and design our events in the first place. So remember this at the beginning of this. We talked about this phase where you get the requirement, the order service gets its requirement. They kind of build this event, they design it, and then they implement it. But maybe we need to rethink that kind of model. And this is what I mean by event-first thinking. And if we treat our events as first-class citizens in our event architecture, I think we can do so much more with our events, rather than treating them within the system themselves. So collaborate as step one, going round to design, and then review, and then implement, okay? So if we dive into these, so what do I mean by collaboration? Well, events, this is something I'm quite passionate about when you're talking about event architectures, right? Events are typically, you know, events are owned by technical teams. Well, in fact, events are actually owned by the business, by the domain, by everything around it, right? So the tech team might be responsible for implementing the events, but the events need to be known by everyone. The events need to be, have that kind of language, that shared language between everyone. So that's when I say collaborate here. What I mean is you can start to collaborate with your team and the domain experts within your organization to come up with the events. And down at the bottom, we have event storming, which is a great process. And I recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it already. It's a great process to get your business domain experts within your organization, or maybe your product owners and your project managers. And I've done this in the past and it works great. You kind of specify the events within the process of what you're building. And then you start to create this kind of collaboration of event design and event thinking. So the next stage is, once you have this map and these events, you start to kind of create these contexts and these bounded contexts. So now we're kind of talking about domain-driven design here. But you get to choose the event pattern. So what I mean here is maybe in this certain scenario with this certain event, maybe we could go with a notification event. Or maybe with this kind of event, maybe we could go with a more kind of state-carried transfer event. And what I'm kind of getting at there is no right or wrong answer with the event design itself. But if you have the shared understanding and design, you can create that language, that shared language with the organization. And once you start doing this and defining the boundaries of the system and everything around your events, you can have this kind of review process. And what I mean by that is not kind of a blocking review process, but maybe sometimes with the order, for example, the order created event, we could have had a quick review with other people or domain experts in this organization to define this event. And then that implementation stage is when we're implementing our events and our architectures, could we standardize the packages that we're using? Could we standardize the libraries that we're using? If we're using EventBridge, we use put events, for example, but could we standardize and wrap that around something that we want to do? Add correlation IDs onto the events themselves. You know, start standardizing the event payload, add metadata into that payload, and there are things you can do there. But also what it allows you to do when you start collaborating with events and contracts and schemas and have that shared language, it allows you to work in parallel. So everyone's aware, people could be aware of the producers, people could be aware of the event payloads themselves. They don't necessarily have to wait downstream for the events. So when I'm talking about event first thinking, we talk about notification events, stateful events. We talk about, there's also kind of domain events. When we talk about all these events and what is event design, what is best practices with event design, you'll see there's a huge push in the community at the moment to push towards event storming, to push towards collaboration, push towards domain design, to just try and get that shared understanding of your events, treating them as first-class citizens, and that can really kind of help you downstream and later on understand how your system works, but also have that shared language of the events that are flying through your system, which is pretty helpful and useful. And this is a process that in a previous job, this is a process that I ran. We YOLO'd on the events. We had these accidental kind of temporal couplings between our architecture in our events. We lost that kind of loosely coupled system. And it was quite demoralizing in a way, because as I want to do event design, I want to have all the promises here. And then what I did is kind of run this event storming session within the organization. And then what happens when you run this kind of process is you have people start arguing, right? What do you mean that's order created? No, order created doesn't happen there. Order created happens down here. Or you start going into the details of the system, the behavior of the system. And these are great conversations to have, because once you come out alive at the end of event storm sessions with all your events in place and your domains in place, and you understand what should be raising events and what shouldn't be raising events, you understand, are these stateful events, are these notification events? Then you have that shared understanding. And the beautiful thing about that is when you start having new requirements come in, your business owners, your BAs or whoever's writing your requirements already know what events are in your system, in your organization, and your events start coming in as requirements, and you can implement that. So to kind of summarize here, event design can impact your architecture. I've seen it, I kind of felt that. You know, notifications event or state carried, the stateful events. No matter what, our events will impact our architecture. And when we think about API design and the evolution of API design with Swagger spec and spec first APIs, I think we have to go there, and we will go there, I believe, with events, treating events as first-class citizens and thinking about the schemas, thinking about how they behave in our architecture. Understanding event patterns and trade-offs. So if you're implementing your event, think about downstream consumers. Now, this is something that often happens we say producers should not know about consumers. I kind of definitely agree with that, but what you'll often see is it kind of taken too literal. So when we bubble up to the architecture and the overview of our system, and someone says, what are these events doing? Who's consuming the events? No one really knows. So everyone's scrambling around for documentation. Everyone's scrambling around for these tools that can help us have observability on our event architectures. So just understanding the event patterns and trade-offs when we use our events. Don't let your events impact it accidentally. Just be aware of the patterns that you're using. And then finally, the biggest thing, just collaborate, bring your events up, bring your events outside your tech team, bring them up to domain experts, bring them up to your organization and collaborate on events. And honestly, it will help. It will help you and your organization. It will help your implementation. So I hope you took something away there. If you're interested in, we have like event bridge patterns here, SQS patterns, a load of patterns, a load of resources. If you want to come check it out, workshops, free workshops on there. Check out Serverless Land. And thank you very much. It's been great speaking.